I was tightening the last few bolts on a customer's old truck, the sharp metallic smell of warm oil and grease thick in the humid Texas air, when I heard the deep, expensive rumble of a black Rolls-Royce pulling up outside my shop. The afternoon sun was beating down hard on the tin roof, making everything inside feel hotter and heavier than usual. Sweat rolled down my neck and mixed with the grease already streaked across my arms.
Fix my broken Bugatti and I'll pay for your daughter's surgery.
Squinting against the glare. The ending of this story changed everything. Before we get there, take a quick second to join the community by hitting subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Vivian Calloway stepped out of the luxury car in designer clothes that looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. She stood there for a moment, her eyes slowly scanning my small, dirty garage. The leaking roof, the scattered tools, the faded sign above the door, with pure, undisguised disgust on her face, as if the very sight of it offended her. My daughter Olivia was sitting nearby on an old wooden stool, her small legs swinging gently as she drew cars with her crayons on an old notepad. She had been coming to the shop more often lately, especially on days when she wasn't feeling strong. She looked so small and fragile sitting there among the rusty shelves and old tires. With a cold sneer curling her lips, Vivian looked straight at me and said it loud enough for her entire entourage to hear. "Fix my broken Bugatti, and I'll pay for your daughter's surgery." Her rich friends and assistants burst into loud, mocking laughter, their voices echoing off the metal walls of my garage like it was the funniest thing they had heard all day. One of the women even covered her mouth dramatically while still laughing. Olivia looked up at me with those big, scared brown eyes, her crayon freezing mid-stroke on the paper. The humiliation hit me like a heavy wave, hot, suffocating, and impossible to escape. I felt my face burn, my throat tighten, and for a few long seconds I couldn't find any words. The laughter of those wealthy people rang in my ears, making me feel smaller and more worthless than I had in a long time. That single moment planted a deep, burning seed of shame inside my chest, but buried somewhere far beneath all that pain, a desperate, fragile spark of hope flickered to life, the kind of dangerous hope only a father can hold on to when he knows his little girl's life might depend on it. That night, Olivia woke up struggling to breathe again. The sound of her small, labored breaths pulled me out of a light sleep instantly. I sat up quickly in the darkness of our little bedroom, the old fan above us creaking slowly as it pushed around the warm Texas night air. I could feel the humidity clinging to my skin as I moved to her side, gently lifting her onto my lap. Her little body was tense, her chest rising and falling too fast, too shallow. I held her close, one hand on her back, feeling every strained breath against my palm, whispering soft words I wasn't even sure she could hear. The hospital had warned me the surgery window was closing fast. Dr. Reyes had been very clear during our last visit. If we waited much longer, the risks would grow much higher. I sat there in the dim light of the bedside lamp, rocking her slowly, thinking about how little money I had left in the bank. The numbers kept running through my head like a bad loop. Bills for Olivia's medicines, rent for the shop, the old truck payment I was already behind on. Everything felt like it was slowly closing in around us. Vivian's sneering face kept coming back to me. The way she had looked at me in my own garage, the cold tone in her voice, the laughter of her rich friends still ringing in my ears. I hated that I was even thinking about her offer, but in the quiet hours of the night, with my daughter fighting for air in my arms, pride felt like a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. Sully had told me earlier that evening I was crazy to even consider working for her. We had been sitting outside the shop after closing, the cicadas loud in the trees, and he had shaken his head, warning me that women like Vivian didn't do favors without expecting something in return. He said I was walking into a trap dressed up as hope. I knew he was probably right, but I didn't have any better answers. But watching my daughter suffer took away any choice I had left. Every weak breath she took reminded me that time was running out. I couldn't just sit here hoping for a miracle while she grew weaker. A father isn't supposed to feel this helpless, not when his child needs him the most. The next day, I contacted her people and agreed to the job. My hands were shaking slightly as I made the call, standing in the quiet of the early morning garage, the smell of oil and coffee still lingering from the night before. I told them I would fix her Bugatti, whatever it took. Her private garage was bigger than my entire shop. The moment I stepped inside, the cool, climate-controlled air hit me like a different world. The floor was spotless, polished concrete that reflected the overhead lights, and the walls were lined with tools that looked like they had never been touched by human hands. My old work boots felt loud and out of place with every step. The Bugatti sat under a custom cover like something sacred, almost like a shrine no one was allowed to disturb. When I carefully pulled the fabric away, the car revealed itself. Deep black paint, elegant lines, and an unmistakable presence that made the whole garage feel smaller. It wasn't just a car. It felt like it carried weight. 3 famous restoration teams had already failed and left. Vivian mentioned it casually while standing a few feet away, her arms crossed, as if their failure somehow proved something about the car's value. I could feel her eyes on me the entire time, watching, judging, waiting for me to make a mistake. Vivian watched me with the same cold sneer when I started work, leaning against a marble pillar with her expensive watch catching the light. She didn't say much at first, just observed me like I was some kind of experiment. Every time I picked up a tool or checked a connection, I could feel that look burning into my back. The car felt heavy with some unspoken history. There were small personal touches, a faded handwritten note tucked near the dashboard, a worn leather steering wheel that had clearly been gripped by the same hands for years. It wasn't just a machine to her. It was something much deeper. I kept thinking about Olivia's drawings and her weak smile as I worked. The way she had looked at me when Vivian made that joke in front of everyone. The way her small hand had held mine tighter on the way home. Every bolt I loosened and every measurement I took was for her, for the chance to give her a real future. I decided I would not fail, no matter how she treated me. No matter how many times Vivian sneered or how many times her rich friends laughed behind my back. I had come too far and risked too much to let pride or fear stop me now. As the sun began to set outside the garage windows, casting long shadows across that beautiful, broken car, a quiet determination settled deep in my chest. After days of careful, patient work, I finally found the main issue. It was a tiny, custom linkage part deep inside the fuel delivery system, so small most mechanics would have missed it. The piece had been hand-modified years ago, warped just enough from heat and time to throw everything off balance. I sat there on the cold concrete floor of Vivian's private garage, the smell of old leather, metal, and faint gasoline surrounding me, staring at that little broken part in my grease-stained fingers. I realized a simple 50-cent paperclip, properly shaped and tempered with careful heat from my torch, could work as a temporary fix. It sounded ridiculous even to me, but the dimensions were almost perfect. I spent the next few hours bending, heating, and testing that humble piece of steel with the same focus I once used on million-dollar aerospace components. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, every movement carrying the weight of Olivia's future. The Texas night air was still warm even at 2 in the morning, and the only sound was the occasional pop of the cooling engine and my own steady breathing. When I finally turned the key, the Bugatti's engine roared to life for the first time in years. The deep, rich sound filled the entire garage like thunder waking up after a long sleep. It was smooth, powerful, and alive. For a few beautiful seconds, I just sat there in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel, letting that sound wash over me. Vivian was visibly shocked when she heard the sound. She had been working late in the house and came rushing down in a silk robe, her hair slightly messy for the first time since I'd met her. She stopped in the doorway, eyes wide, staring at the car like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. For the first time, her expression changed from that familiar cold sneer to genuine surprise. Her lips parted slightly, and something soft flickered across her face, almost like disbelief mixed with a trace of wonder. It was the first crack I had seen in her armor. She quickly tried to hide it, crossing her arms and acting like it was nothing special, as if the sound of her father's car coming back to life after years of silence was just another Tuesday. But I had already seen it. That brief, unguarded moment told me more about her than all her expensive clothes and sharp words ever could. I felt a small, quiet victory settle in my chest, warm and real. But even as the engine purred smoothly beside me, I knew this was only the start. Something told me the hardest part wasn't fixing the car. It was figuring out the woman standing in the doorway, watching me with eyes that were finally starting to see me as more than just the janitor who dared to touch her father's ghost. After the engine roared to life that night, the garage fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the smooth idle of the Bugatti. Vivian stood there for a long moment, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Then, in front of her small team of assistants and mechanics, she offered me a large bonus on top of the surgery payment, a number so high it would have changed my life overnight. Her voice was casual, almost generous, like she was throwing a bone to a stray dog. I politely refused the extra money right there in front of everyone. The words came out steady, even though my heart was still racing from the sound of the engine. I could feel their eyes on me, surprised that someone like me would turn down that kind of cash. The air in the garage suddenly felt thicker, the smell of hot metal and oil mixing with the faint scent of her expensive perfume. I looked her straight in the eye and reminded her how she had sneered at me and my daughter in front of all those people at the gala. How her friends had laughed like my desperation was the evening's entertainment. The memory still burned in my chest every time I thought about Olivia's scared face that night. She laughed again, a short, sharp sound, thinking I was joking about the whole thing or trying to play some kind of humble game. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, as if she couldn't believe a man in dirty work clothes would actually turn down money from her. I told her calmly, my voice low but clear, that I would fix her car for my daughter's sake, but I would never accept any personal humiliation as part of the deal. Not then, not ever. The words hung in the air between us. I wasn't angry. I was just tired of pretending that her words hadn't cut me deep in front of my own child. This was the first time anyone had spoken to her so directly without fear. I could see it in the way her expression shifted, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her confident posture faltered for just a second. No one in her world probably dared to draw that kind of line with her. Vivian left the garage visibly shaken and silent. She didn't say another word. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished floor as she walked away, her team trailing behind her in awkward quiet. I stood there alone with the Bugatti still purring softly, the weight of what I had just done settling over me. I had drawn my line. But I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of something much more complicated between us. Vivian started coming to the garage more often after that night, always with some weak excuse about checking on the timeline or making sure I wasn't damaging anything valuable. At first, she would stand at a distance in her expensive clothes, arms crossed, watching me work. But over the next few days, those visits grew longer. She would linger near the workbench, sometimes asking small questions about what I was doing, her voice less sharp than before. She saw how I balanced long hours on the Bugatti while taking care of Olivia after school. Olivia would come straight to the shop most afternoons, still wearing her school uniform, and sit quietly in the corner with her drawings. I would pause my work to check on her, make sure she had taken her medicine, wipe her forehead when she looked tired, or simply sit with her for a few minutes when she needed me. I never made a show of it. It was just what a father does. One evening, she witnessed Olivia having a scary breathing attack in the shop. It came on suddenly while Olivia was drawing. Her small chest started rising and falling too fast, her face going pale. I dropped everything and rushed to her side, holding her gently, talking to her softly until the attack passed. The fear in my voice was real. I could feel Vivian standing there watching the whole thing, silent and still. For the first time, she saw the real desperation and fear in my life. Not the version I tried to hide behind pride, but the raw, everyday version that lived with me every single day. When Olivia finally calmed down and fell asleep against my shoulder, the garage was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic outside. She quietly offered to help speed up the hospital arrangements. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it, almost hesitant. She said she knew people who could move things faster, get the surgery scheduled sooner. No cameras, no show, just a simple offer. I refused, saying I didn't want her pity or charity. The words came out calm but firm. I told her I would find my own way, even if it was harder. I had come this far without begging, and I wasn't going to start now, no matter how tempting the help was. My refusal seemed to affect her more deeply than I expected. She didn't argue or sneer like before. She just looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable passing across her face, then nodded once and left without another word. As I sat there holding my sleeping daughter, the garage felt heavier than usual. I could tell something inside her had shifted, even if she wasn't ready to admit it yet, and that scared me more than anything else. While working deep inside the Bugatti late one evening, I found old handwritten notes from Vivian's late father. They were tucked carefully behind a panel near the dashboard, yellowed paper covered in neat, precise handwriting. The garage was quiet except for the soft hum of the overhead lights and the occasional creak of cooling metal. The smell of old leather and faint gasoline hung in the air as I carefully unfolded the notes. The notes showed he had been personally restoring the car before he died suddenly. Page after page detailed his thoughts, small modifications he wanted to make, and even little sketches in the margins. It wasn't just a project to him. It was something deeply personal, something he poured his love and time into during his final months. I sat there on the cold floor for a long time, reading every word, feeling the weight of what I was holding. This discovery hit Vivian very hard when I showed her. She had come down to the garage unexpectedly, still dressed in her work clothes. The moment she saw her father's handwriting, her entire body went still. Her usual confident posture faltered. She took the notes from my hands with trembling fingers, reading them slowly as the color drained from her face. She confronted me, asking why I was trying to finish something so personal. Her voice cracked slightly, the cold mask slipping away as she looked at me with something close to pain. "Why are you digging into things that aren't yours?" she asked, the words sharp but trembling underneath. I told her I was doing it for my daughter, not to hurt her memories. I explained that I never meant to intrude on something so sacred, that I was only trying to keep my promise so Olivia could have a chance. My voice stayed calm, but I could feel the emotion behind it. I wasn't there to take anything from her. I was simply fighting for my child the only way I knew how. Vivian broke down crying in front of me for the first time. She tried to hold it back at first, turning away, but the tears came anyway, quiet, heavy sobs that shook her shoulders. She pressed the notes against her chest like they were the last piece of her father she had left. In that moment, the powerful CEO disappeared, and all that remained was a daughter who never got to say goodbye. The cold wall she had built around herself started to crack. I could see it in the way she looked at me afterward, no longer with that familiar sneer, but with something raw and uncertain. As she stood there trying to compose herself, the garage felt smaller, more intimate. I didn't offer empty words of comfort. I simply sat there with her in the silence, the Bugatti humming softly between us, knowing that something important had just shifted between us, whether we were ready for it or not. Vivian began coming to the garage without her usual cold armor and entourage. At first it was just once or twice, but soon it became almost every evening. She would show up in simple jeans and a plain blouse, her hair loose instead of perfectly styled, looking more like a real person and less like the untouchable CEO I had first met. The change was small, but I noticed it immediately. She started speaking gently to Olivia during her visits. At first it was just a few careful words, asking what she was drawing or if she wanted a cold drink from the house. Olivia, who was usually shy around strangers, slowly began to answer back in her quiet voice. I would watch them from the side of the Bugatti, my hands still working, feeling something complicated stir in my chest as I saw my daughter smile at her. I could see the internal battle she was fighting with her own grief. Sometimes she would stand quietly near the car, staring at it with a faraway look in her eyes, her fingers tracing small marks her father had left behind. Other times she would catch herself and quickly look away, as if being soft was dangerous. I didn't push her. I just kept working and let the silence sit between us. One quiet evening, she asked me about my late wife and how I was raising Olivia alone. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it, almost hesitant. We were both tired, the garage lit only by a few overhead lights, the smell of oil and warm metal still hanging in the air. I told her the truth, how hard the first year had been, how I learned to be both mother and father, how some nights I still felt completely lost but kept going because Olivia needed me. For the first time, she actually listened without judging or sneering. She didn't interrupt with sharp comments or cold observations. She just sat there on an old stool, nodding slowly, her eyes focused on me like my words actually mattered. It felt strange, dangerous even. I remained cautious, still protecting my daughter's heart above everything else. No matter how different Vivian seemed in these moments, I kept reminding myself who she was and how this all started. I couldn't afford to let Olivia get attached to someone who might disappear when things got difficult. But something real and unexpected was slowly growing between us. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet conversations, shared silences, and small moments of understanding that neither of us had planned. As I watched her laugh softly at something Olivia said, I felt a pull I wasn't ready for, and it scared me how much I didn't want it to stop. Olivia suddenly took a serious turn late one afternoon. I was deep in the engine bay when I heard her small voice calling me, weak and frightened. By the time I reached her, she was struggling to breathe, her face pale and her little hands clutching her chest. The fear in her eyes broke something inside me. I didn't think twice. I scooped her up, rushed her into the truck, and drove to St. Eleanor's as fast as the old engine would allow, my heart pounding louder than the tires on the road. The doctors said the surgery could no longer be delayed even by a few weeks. They spoke in serious, quiet voices in the hallway, explaining that her condition had worsened faster than they expected. Every word felt like another weight pressing down on my chest. I stood there nodding, trying to look strong for Olivia, but inside I was falling apart. I sat in the waiting room, completely broken, feeling like I had failed my daughter. The sterile smell of disinfectant and the distant beeps of machines filled the air. I kept replaying every moment, every late night in the garage, every time I chose work over rest, every time I told myself I was doing enough. Now my little girl was lying in a hospital bed again, and all I could do was sit there with empty hands and a heavy heart. The fear was so deep it made everything else feel distant. Vivian showed up at the hospital without being called. I didn't know how she found out, but suddenly she was there, walking down the hallway in simple clothes, no makeup, no armor. She didn't say much at first. She just sat down beside me in the uncomfortable plastic chair and stayed. She stayed with me through the longest and scariest night of my life. The hours dragged on in that dim waiting room, the clock on the wall ticking slowly. Nurses came and went. Doctors updated us in hushed voices. Through it all, Vivian remained by my side. She brought me coffee when I didn't ask. She sat quietly when I couldn't speak. She didn't try to fix anything with money or power. She was just there. In those quiet hours, I saw a completely different side of her. The cold, sneering woman from the garage was gone. In her place was someone who looked almost as scared as I felt. She told me in a low voice about the night she lost her husband, how helpless she had felt then. Her voice trembled slightly, and for the first time I saw the real pain she carried behind all that wealth and control. Her silent presence gave me a strength I didn't know I needed. I didn't feel so completely alone anymore. As the first light of morning began to creep through the hospital windows, I realized something had shifted between us. Whatever this was, it was no longer just about fixing a car or paying for surgery. It had become something much more human. And that thought both comforted me and terrified me as we waited for news about my daughter. After Olivia's successful surgery, the relief I felt was deeper than anything I had known in years. She was resting peacefully in her hospital bed, her small chest rising and falling steadily for the first time in months. I sat beside her, holding her hand, when Vivian walked into the room carrying a folder. She looked tired but determined. Without any dramatic introduction, she made me a serious offer to cover all the remaining medical costs, including follow-up care and medicines for the next 2 years. The number she mentioned was enough to take the heaviest weight off my shoulders. I struggled with my pride and dignity for a long time. I sat there staring at the papers she had placed on the small table, my grease-stained hands feeling out of place in that clean hospital room. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell her I could still find a way on my own. The same pride that had kept me going through the hardest years was screaming at me not to accept charity from the woman who had once sneered at me in my own garage. I thought about my late wife, about how we had always tried to stand on our own feet. The internal battle raged quietly inside me as the machines beeped softly around us. Vivian finally admitted she had been wrong about me from the very beginning. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant as she spoke. She said she had judged me the moment she saw my dirty shop and worn clothes, assuming I was just another man looking for an easy handout. She admitted that watching me work on the Bugatti, seeing how I cared for Olivia, and hearing me turn down the bonus had slowly broken through her assumptions. For the first time, she looked vulnerable as she said those words. I accepted her help, but only on the condition that there were no strings attached. I told her clearly that this was not a debt I would repay with anything other than the finished car. No favors, no expectations, no future claims on my time or my life. She nodded slowly, and for once there was no sneer, no cold smile, just a simple understanding between us. This moment marked the real beginning of her transformation. Something in the way she looked at me changed. The walls she had built so carefully over the years seemed to loosen just a little more. I could see it in her eyes. The arrogance was fading, replaced by something quieter and more human. Our relationship slowly started shifting from tension to something deeper. We talked more openly during her visits to the hospital. She asked questions about Olivia's favorite drawings, about my life before the garage, about the small things that kept me going. I answered honestly, no longer feeling the need to protect myself at every turn. I was still careful, but I could feel the walls between us coming down. As I sat there holding my daughter's hand with Vivian sitting quietly across from me, the sterile hospital room felt less cold. A new kind of understanding was growing between us, slow and uncertain, but real. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely alone in this fight. Vivian began opening up about her difficult relationship with her late husband and how his sudden death had left her terrified of losing control. We were sitting in the quiet corner of the hospital garden one evening, the smell of fresh-cut grass and distant rain in the air. Her voice was low and careful as she spoke about the fights they used to have, the way she had always pushed for more success, more power, thinking it would keep them safe. When he died while she was away on a business trip, something inside her broke. She said the fear of losing control had become her only armor since that day. She admitted that her wealth had slowly isolated her from real human connection over the years. She told me how people around her only saw the money, the company, the power. Friends became business associates. Conversations became transactions. She had grown so used to it that she no longer knew how to let anyone close without wondering what they wanted from her. As she spoke, her fingers traced the edge of the wooden bench, her usual sharp confidence replaced by a quiet vulnerability that felt new and fragile. I shared my own struggles and fears about raising Olivia alone after losing my wife. I told her about the nights I sat in the dark garage wondering if I was doing enough, the guilt that came with every hospital bill I couldn't pay right away, and the constant fear that one day Olivia would wake up and realize her father couldn't protect her from everything. The words came easier than I expected. For the first time, I wasn't trying to sound strong. I was just telling the truth. For the first time, we spoke to each other as equals, without power or pride getting in the way. There was no sneer, no cold smile, no defensive walls. Just two people sitting on a hospital bench, carrying their own heavy losses, finally seeing each other clearly. The evening light softened around us, and for those few minutes the world outside the garden felt far away. She started spending real, unguarded time with Olivia, building a gentle bond that surprised both of us. She would bring small things during her visits, a new coloring book, a soft, stuffed animal, or just sit and listen while Olivia showed her drawings. I watched from a distance as my daughter, who had always been shy with strangers, slowly began to smile more easily around her. It was a quiet, careful kind of warmth that grew without force. I could see the old, cold and arrogant version of Vivian slowly disappearing day by day. The woman who had once sneered at me in my own garage was being replaced by someone who stayed late, who asked real questions, who seemed almost afraid of how much she was starting to care. It was subtle, but I noticed every small change. But I still kept my guard up, not fully trusting how real this change was. Part of me kept waiting for the old Vivian to return, for the moment when she would remember who she was and pull away. As I watched her laugh softly at something Olivia said, a quiet tension remained in my chest. I wanted to believe this was real, but I had learned too many hard lessons about hope to let myself fall completely. One evening, Vivian told me she had developed real feelings for me and wanted to explore a genuine relationship. We were sitting outside the garage as the Texas sky turned deep orange, the last light of the day catching the edges of the old tools scattered around us. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, nothing like the cold, confident woman I had first met. She said the words carefully, as if she was afraid I might pull away. For a long moment, I didn't know what to say. The air between us felt heavy with everything we had been through. I was torn between the growing attraction I felt and my strong need to protect Olivia from any more pain. I had spent years building walls to keep my daughter safe after losing her mother. The thought of letting someone new into our lives, especially someone as complicated as Vivian, terrified me. I could see the hope in her eyes, but all I could think about was Olivia's small face and how much she had already suffered. I stayed silent for a long time, the smell of warm metal and evening rain in the air, my heart pulling in two different directions. After long, honest conversations with Sully, I decided to take a careful chance. We sat on the old bench behind the shop one night, the cicadas loud in the trees, and he listened as I poured out all my fears. He didn't give me easy advice. He simply reminded me that life was short and that Olivia deserved to see her father happy too. His words stayed with me. A few days later, I told Vivian I was willing to try, but slowly, and with Olivia's heart always coming first. We started seeing each other slowly and privately, away from the public eye. Quiet dinners at her house when Olivia was asleep, long talks in the garage after dark, small moments that felt both exciting and frightening. There was no rush, no grand gestures, just two people learning to trust each other one careful step at a time. Olivia began to warm up to Vivian in a natural and beautiful way that filled my heart. She started showing her new drawings, asking her simple questions, even laughing at the silly faces Vivian made when she thought no one was watching. Watching them together, the way Olivia's eyes lit up a little more each day, did something to me I can't fully explain. For the first time in years, our small family started feeling complete and hopeful. The house felt warmer. The evenings felt less heavy. Even the garage seemed brighter when Vivian was there. I found myself smiling more, breathing easier, daring to imagine a future that didn't feel like constant survival. Old wounds don't heal overnight, and I was still watchful. Part of me kept waiting for something to go wrong, for the old cold Vivian to return, for life to remind me that hope could be dangerous. But as I watched my daughter fall asleep with her head on Vivian's shoulder one quiet evening, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. The fragile, beautiful possibility that we might actually be okay. Vivian's old circle of arrogant friends and business partners tried to pull her back into her previous cold lifestyle. They started calling more often, showing up at her house unannounced, reminding her of the woman she used to be, the one who made ruthless decisions without hesitation. I could see the pressure mounting on her during our quiet evenings. She would check her phone with a tense expression, then put it away quickly when she noticed me watching. She faced a major business decision that would have required her to return to her old, ruthless ways. A big deal that could make her company even more powerful, but it meant crushing a smaller competitor, the kind of move she used to make without a second thought. One night she sat in the garage with me after Olivia had gone to sleep, explaining the situation in a tired voice. The old Vivian would have taken it without blinking. The woman sitting next to me was clearly torn. She chose to stand by me and Olivia instead of going back to her old life of power and isolation. She turned down the deal. She told her board and her old circle that she was done making choices that left her empty inside. When she said it, her voice was steady, but I could see how much it cost her. She chose us. She chose something real over the safety of her old armor. This decision cost her some powerful connections and created tension in her company. A few key partners pulled out. Meetings became difficult. Whispers started in the industry that she was losing her edge. She never complained about it to me, but I saw the late nights and the quiet stress in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. I saw how much she was willing to risk and change for us. It wasn't just words anymore. She was putting her entire world on the line, her reputation, her power, her carefully built empire, for a struggling mechanic and his daughter. That realization hit me deeper than anything else had so far. It made me feel both grateful and unworthy at the same time. Our bond grew even stronger through this real test of her transformation. The nights we spent talking became more honest. The silences between us felt safer. She wasn't just visiting anymore. She was choosing to stay, even when it hurt her outside life. Olivia started calling her Aunt Viv for the first time, a small moment that meant everything. It happened one quiet afternoon in the garage. Olivia looked up from her drawing and said it so naturally, like it had always been that way. Vivian froze for a second, her eyes softening in a way I had rarely seen. She smiled. A real, gentle smile, and answered softly. In that small moment, watching the two of them, I felt something shift inside me. The walls I had built so carefully were starting to come down too, whether I was ready or not. Olivia's recovery after surgery was slow but steady, giving all of us new hope. The first week was difficult, watching her small body adjust in the hospital bed, but each passing day brought small improvements. Her breathing grew easier, her color returned, and the doctors started speaking with more confidence. I spent every hour I could by her side, holding her hand, whispering stories, grateful for every steady breath she took. Vivian and I had many honest, late-night conversations about our past pain and losses. We would sit together in the quiet hospital room or on the bench outside when Olivia was sleeping, the soft glow of the hallway lights around us. She spoke about the emptiness she felt after losing her husband, how she had thrown herself into work to avoid feeling anything at all. I told her about the long, lonely nights after my wife passed, learning to be both mother and father while barely keeping myself together. She admitted how empty and lonely her life had felt before meeting us. Her voice was quiet as she described coming home to a big, beautiful house that always felt cold and silent. Success had given her everything except someone who truly saw her. She said she had grown so used to being alone that she almost forgot what real connection felt like. I finally allowed myself to trust her completely and let my guard down. It didn't happen suddenly. It came in small moments, when I stopped waiting for her to hurt us, when I let her help without feeling ashamed, when I realized I was no longer protecting myself from her. For the first time in years, I let someone in without keeping one hand on the door. We started building something real, quiet, and beautiful together as a family. Simple evenings at the garage, Olivia showing Vivian her drawings, shared meals where laughter came more easily. There were no dramatic declarations, just steady, gentle days that slowly wove the three of us together. Olivia began to thrive under the love and attention of two caring adults. Her eyes lit up more often. She drew with more energy. She started talking about the future again, school fairs, new crayons, and the next car she wanted to draw. Watching her come back to life healed something deep inside both of us. The future started looking brighter than I had dared to imagine for a long time. As I sat with them one quiet evening, the warm Texas breeze moving through the open garage door, I felt a peace settle over me that I hadn't known in years. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And that thought no longer terrified me. Vivian's old business partners started a quiet campaign against her in the company. It began with subtle whispers in board meetings, carefully placed questions about her focus, and private calls that suddenly stopped when I entered the room. I could see the strain on her face when she came to the garage in the evenings, the way she checked her phone more often, her shoulders tighter than usual. They used our relationship as a weapon to question her judgment. Rumors spread that she had lost her edge, that she was making emotional decisions instead of smart ones. Someone leaked stories to the press suggesting she was being influenced by a small-town mechanic with a sick child. The words hurt more than I expected. I saw how they twisted something good into something ugly, using Olivia and me as proof that she was no longer fit to lead. She had to make a difficult choice between protecting her position and protecting us. For several tense days, she barely slept, walking the fine line between keeping her company stable and refusing to hide our relationship. One night, she sat with me in the garage long after Olivia had fallen asleep, the smell of cooling metal and faint rain on the roof around us, and told me she was done pretending. She chose us. I saw how much pressure she was under because of me and Olivia. The late nights, the tired eyes, the way she would sometimes stare off into the distance when she thought I wasn't looking. For the first time, I felt guilty for becoming a burden on her. This powerful woman who had everything was now risking her entire world for a struggling mechanic and his daughter. The weight of that realization sat heavy on my chest. She reassured me that she chose this path herself. She took my grease-stained hand in hers and said quietly that for the first time in years, she felt like she was living for something real, not just power or appearances. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were soft in a way that still surprised me. Our bond became even stronger after this test. The pressure from the outside world didn't break us. It forged something deeper. We talked more openly, held each other a little longer, and faced the challenges together instead of apart. As the storm around her company slowly settled, I realized we had come through something important. What started as a cruel joke in a dirty garage had grown into something worth fighting for. Just when everything seemed to be settling into a quiet, hopeful rhythm, Olivia had a sudden medical emergency that required immediate surgery. It happened late one afternoon while she was drawing at the shop. One moment she was smiling and showing me her latest car sketch. The next she was struggling to breathe, her small body going limp in my arms. The fear that hit me was sharp and familiar. I didn't hesitate. I carried her to the truck and drove to the hospital with my heart in my throat, the Texas evening light blurring past the windows. The hospital demanded full payment up front before proceeding. The billing office was firm. No exceptions, no delays. The amount they quoted made my stomach drop. Even with Vivian's earlier help, the sudden emergency had created new costs that left us short. I stood at the counter feeling the familiar weight of helplessness pressing down on me again, the sterile smell of the hospital corridor making everything feel colder. Vivian's company board tried to stop her from using company funds. They called her repeatedly, pressuring her to distance herself, warning that this kind of personal involvement was damaging the company's image. I overheard parts of the tense conversations as she paced the hallway. For a moment, I thought she might have to choose between us and everything she had built. She fought them and arranged the payment herself. She made the calls, signed the papers, and handled everything without hesitation. When she came back to the waiting area, her face was tired but resolute. She didn't make a show of it. She simply sat down beside me and said it was taken care of. I felt completely helpless watching my daughter being taken into surgery. As the nurses wheeled Olivia away, her small hand slipping from mine, I stood there frozen in the hallway. The fear was so deep it made my legs feel weak. All the progress, all the hope we had built suddenly felt fragile again. I leaned against the wall, staring at the doors as they closed behind her, my mind filled with every worst possibility. Vivian stayed with me the entire time without leaving my side. She sat quietly beside me through the long hours, sometimes just holding my hand in silence, sometimes offering a few soft words when the waiting became too heavy. She brought me coffee when I couldn't move. She stayed even when the night grew late and the hospital corridors emptied out. In those hours I realized how much she had truly changed for us. The woman who had once sneered at me in my dirty garage was now sitting in a hospital waiting room at 3 a.m., choosing to stay through the hardest night of my life. No cameras, no audience, no benefit to her. Just her, choosing to be there. As the first morning light started to creep through the windows, I looked at her resting head on my shoulder and felt something deep inside me finally settle. Whatever came next, we were in this together. After Olivia's successful surgery and full recovery, Vivian and I got married in a small ceremony behind my shop. The Texas sky was painted soft gold and pink that evening, the same warm light that used to filter through the cracks in the tin roof during long nights of work. There were no cameras, no guests in designer clothes, just Sully, a few close friends from the neighborhood, Olivia holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, and the two of us standing under the old oak tree near the garage. It felt right, simple, honest. Olivia walked between us, healthy and smiling brightly for the first time in years. Her small hand held mine tightly, then reached for Vivian's. The color had returned to her cheeks, and her laughter came easily again as she skipped a little between us. Watching her move without fear or pain in her chest filled me with a gratitude so deep it was almost overwhelming. She looked up at both of us with those big, bright eyes, and in that moment I knew we had made it through the hardest chapter. Vivian quietly created a foundation to help other single parents facing medical crises for their children. She didn't announce it with press conferences or big events. She simply did it, using her resources to cover surgeries, treatments, and support for families who were where I once was. She told me one night while we sat on the porch that she never wanted another father to feel as helpless as I had felt. Her voice was soft, almost shy, as if she was still getting used to carrying this openly. I kept my small garage open and continued working with my own hands. Some things didn't change. I still came home with grease under my nails and oil stains on my shirts. The leaking roof was finally fixed, but the smell of motor oil and coffee in the mornings remained the same. I liked it that way. It reminded me where I came from and what I had fought for. Years later, Olivia would tell people that her father fixed more than just cars. He fixed broken people, too. She said it with pride in her voice, usually while showing someone one of her many drawings of the Bugatti. Every time I heard her say it, something warm settled in my chest. She had grown into a strong, kind girl who remembered the hard times but wasn't defined by them. Vivian often said with a soft smile that the best decision she ever made was that arrogant joke she made that day. She would say it while watching Olivia play or while we sat together on quiet evenings, the three of us. The woman who once sneered at me in my dirty garage had become someone who laughed easily, who loved deeply, and who wasn't afraid to show it anymore. In the end, what started as a cruel public sneer became the beginning of our real family and a second chance at life for all of us. As I stand in the garage sometimes, looking at that old Bugatti now fully restored and shining under the lights, I think about how far we've come. The scars are still there, the grief, the fear, the long nights, but they no longer define us. They simply remind us how strong love can be when it's real. And as Olivia runs toward us with another drawing in her hands and Vivian smiles at me across the room, I know without any doubt that we didn't just fix a car, we fixed each other.